Thank you for joining Panaseer and our guests for today's webinar, Navigating the New Norms of Cybersecurity Leadership, Risks, Compliance Pressures, Board Scrutiny, and Wellbeing. At Panaseer, we work with hundreds of security leaders each year to publish a Security Leaders Peer Report, an annual pulse on what's keeping CEOs up at night, what new trends are emerging in the field, and what trends persist year after year. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by two esteemed security leaders, Sneha and Wendy, to explore these themes. Panelists, please introduce yourselves.
Hi, everyone. Sneha Parmar here. I am currently an information security officer at Lufthansa Group Digital Hangar.
Hi, I'm Wendy, and I am a business information security officer for Marks Spencer's.
Thank you both. So, as I mentioned, each year we produce a Security Leaders Peer Report, and it's really just an annual research to understand what's top of mind for security leaders. This year we had 400 security leaders participate, and increasingly we're seeing growth in external threats, but also internal pressures. So assurance, demonstrating compliance, board scrutiny, all of those are becoming much more important. What's changed over the past 5 years have been things around control failures and cyber hygiene, added complexity of regulations and legislation, and much greater board scrutiny. Today, we're hoping to talk about what we can do to face these mounting pressures, what approaches we can take, and how we can look out for each other. First, let's talk about regulatory pressures and compliance. With the need to increasingly demonstrate cyber and digital resilience and new legislation across the US and the EU, security leaders are working tirelessly to report and comply. 70% of those who answered our report say that there are too many unknowns to have a clear picture of their risk, and nearly half weren't confident that what they reported on to the board was fully accurate. So my question to you is there an inherent level of acceptable risk you take on when it comes to reporting, or are you generally looking for full accuracy?
Let me jump in. So I think with any kind of reporting, I think there's it's sort of the level of acceptance, as it were, on industries. But I think any reporting, you always caveat it. This is what we have in terms of visibility. I think typically boards are quite, they want to obviously as much visibility as possible and make sure that the organization's in a good place, but they do accept a certain level. They do know that at that point in time we might not have the 100% picture, and I think even the regulators sort of are quite understanding of that, provided you have demonstrated due diligence.
I would say the same, because the biggest problem every company faces is asset inventory. And so, like, if you don't know what you've got, it's really difficult. And every company every organization is trying to get more and more and more information about what kind of attack surface they have. And I also think most regulations are also moving in the direction, most frameworks were always moving in the direction of having that, but it's still on the building stage. And so there are always, from board side, as well as from management, from security perspective, as well as from regulators perspective, everybody knows that this is the case, and you prepare and report for what you know. There would always be something unknown. And the goal is to keep on improving the visibility aspect and then putting in more and more and more. So that would be like also the roadmap which you go into to find more about your organization. There would be something in the shadows, and you want to make sure that you address that.
So let's stay on that topic for a second. So it sounds like you're building a roadmap to kind of always increase your visibility to your landscape and your assets, so on and so forth. So on the flip side, what's your approach to reporting? And do you feel like it's scalable, or is it more of a work in progress, cumbersome?
It's work in progress always, because there would be a lot of fluctuations in terms of board, but also in terms of market, in terms of budget, in terms of threats, which we see. And so you have to make sure that the reporting side is also adaptable to the risks which you see, because the markets can shift very quickly. Right now we see AI coming in. I don't think 3 or 4 years ago we were presenting this risk, but right now it is the biggest question which most board as well as regulators would have. It's like, okay, how are you dealing with your AI risks? And every company who's going into the consumer-facing business, which has a lot of behavioral use cases, are moving into or are looking into enhancing their products on AI. So this is where the adaptability comes in. And so I would say it's work in progress. And also, depending on the shift in the market as well as on your business, you have to make sure that then those risks are presented in more detail, with finer details. And you have to make sure that security then is able to enable that business unit or business area or the direction, and not get into slowing it down.
I completely agree with that, and I think there's, you know, we from sort of, you know, the actual grinding side of it, you know, we try and automate as much as possible. You know, there's a number of tools that we could leverage, but you know, for the ultimate report and pulling out the information, there's going to be a certain level of just manipulation, you know, for the report that you want. And you know, it depends on the level that's your sort of the report goes to. It's sort of the granularity of these reports. So I think we can't. I would love to sort of be able to, you know, go on the AI subject to say, oh, we're going to use AI and we're going to just, like, you know, build our reports, you know, for every level, and it's going to be, you know, specified. But I don't think we're quite there yet. So there's still a bit of manual work in the background.
Great. And then let's talk about regulation for a second. Do you find in your industry regulation to be a help or a hindrance?
Both, I would say. I mean, I totally get it from regulators' perspective. They're trying to be helpful, but what I see is happening right now is because of the way the organizations were set up. So security was always bolted on. It has never been in, like, yes, we all talk about shift left, but we know that how cumbersome it is, how painful it is. And so it's still bolted on, which is a bit unfortunate, but that's the case. It has improved, but it's still the case. And so what happens is regulators are coming in, but they create a little bit of sandwich for the security team as well. And you have to make sure that you work with the business and make sure that they understand the value. Otherwise, what happens is, like, regulations are coming in left and right, and they're just so much that you're constantly then more like, you know, focusing on the regulations and figuring out your security quarter or a year how to look forward to, rather than having this proactive threat-based approach on your strategy or so, because there are just too much of regulations. And it goes on more towards the compliance aspect of it, like reporting the compliance aspect of it. So you do spend a lot of time, which you would ideally would have spent on more, I'd say, threat focused or proactive security strategy. So it sometimes throws off your plans, but it's necessary in an industry where we deal with so much of consumer data, or even in emergency or certain critical sectors. It's just absolutely necessary. I just feel that a little more collaborations from every department would be helpful. Understanding that, yes, we have to do this. There's no argument or option. We all have to just do this. And so, yeah, I would say it's trying to be helpful, but there's 50-50.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. So I think there's the regulatory side of it. It certainly takes effort. You know, the reporting itself, it would take effort. Demonstrating alignment, you know, you're taking away time that your team might have spent on, you know, other activities. So there's that. You know, I also agree that there are certain advantages. So it does provide, you know, lots of these regulations, depending on the industry, it does provide a high level framework. And when you're business and you're going to your board for support, I think a regulation where, you know, you must do this can be quite helpful, you know, in that conversation. But it's a bit of a double-edged sword there. Absolutely agree.
Yeah, that makes sense. And right. So obviously, regulations and compliance can help give a third-party validation to the work that you're doing as well, right? So let's stay on the topic for one more second. So when it comes to compliance versus security, I know for BISOs and CISOs, it's a balancing act. So can you talk to me a little bit about that balance, right? Are you able to devote equal time to both? Do you have to focus on one more than the other? How do you find, you know, wrestling with those two competing demands?
Most organizations, I think, the sort of ideal posture is sort of being relatively pragmatic, because we, you know, irrespective of regulatory requirements and so on, we should not be the department that sort of tells them, you know, you can't do this. I think it's a balancing act of working with them, and of course that also mean you have to devote additional time to sort of understand what the actual issues are, and, you know, what are these sort of circumstances and, you know, potentially background for the issue. But it is working with the business to find a sort of balance and identify those risks which the organization would accept. And I think for you know, regard to sort of compliance and, you know, visibility, it's you do want to be in a position where you encourage departments to basically report and provide as much visibility as they can. And I think sort of demonstrate sort of you're willing to work with them, as opposed to sort of the other, you know, the other side of the coin, which just end up with a, you know, lot of shadow IT going on, which massively increases your risk. So it's that sort of balancing pragmatic approach. And I think even from the sort of regulator point of view, I think, you know, should they unfortunately come and knock on your door, I think the ability to demonstrate due diligence, I think goes a long way in terms of, you know, basically laying out the story.
I'd also agree to that. The balancing part is very important, especially in the past 5 to 10 years, just because there's a traditional way of doing compliance, which has evolved a lot, but a lot of people still see it as a tick box compliance. And on the engineering or development side, what we should move towards is more automating it, so that we kind of like reduce the steps for people to maybe request something. So like, to avoid shadow IT, you have to make it simpler. If there are like 10 chains of like approval process, then people would not want to report that, because they could just like subscribe on their personal name and just expense it. So this is where things evolve, and you can find this like from different incidents or different situations where you get these intel, and you realize that it is our job, but also compliance's job, to figure out how simple the process is. And so the more and more focus we could put on automating GRC, so governance, risk, compliance aspects, but also talking to the business and explaining them the value, that is where I see, I spend a lot of time on that. Even in my previous roles, I've done that, is just to get the understanding from somebody who's from legal compliance and somebody who's from engineering, and then make them sit together and then figuring out, okay, what would be a good use case. That is where I think we have to find the balancing aspect, and be pragmatic and understand that, you know, whatever is written on the compliance side, word to word, it could be implemented differently. There's not just one way of implementing a control. That could be multiple ways, or maybe a layered technical control options. And so, yeah, it's a balancing act, also pragmatic, but it does take a lot of time to do that.
Yes, especially that working together with the engineering team, that's sort of communication and sort of getting that visibility. It is there's no way around it. It still is unfortunately quite a manual process, and you do have to devote time to it.
Yeah, and so for the last handful of years, cybersecurity has been cast in a light around, instead of disallowing folks to be able to do things, how as a function can our cybersecurity teams help enable business to get done with less friction and that kind of thing. And it sounds like a lot of the things you're talking about here touch on those themes. Do you believe that you are guiding your organization to more enablement?
As Wendy said, it's more about working with them rather than against them. And so when you kind of try to disallow or be an enforcer, you are working against the business. And a lot of times then people would not report to you anything which they know, because they might be like, hey, if I tell them, then I would have like 10 more steps and it would slow down my business or my product or my go live. And so enablement is the approach to follow. Yes, there would be times where you have to enforce something, like, for example, MFA. That is like, without a doubt, you have to. But again, I think a lot of organizations, a lot of big vendors are also moving in this direction. So then it's like the entire industry is moving in that direction. So that's then not necessarily taken as an enforcing mechanism, because people understand the risks and the value it might provide. But again, like, being an enabler is a lot better, because every step is painful in terms of having this alignment. And a product side of business would just see like, they want to move fast, so they would see the advancement but not necessarily the risk. Security or legal would more see the risks. So it's a completely different approach and a different vision, and you have to bring it together so that you could move forward sustainable. Like, you can sustain the growth, not necessarily stop it or completely block it, but just make sure that you can sustain the growth and there's consistency. So there's not like, okay, we grew too fast and then there's a disruption because of a security issue or an incident or so. So you want to make sure that it's sustainable and scalable. And this is where you have to have that conversation and make sure that you are going with an approach which is more enabling the business.
I absolutely agree with that. I think a lot of times it is working with the business to identify those risks. What are you exposed to, and ultimately it's the business that's going to be accepting those risks rather, as an organization. I think would definitely need to be be enablement in terms of being helpful to the organization and being open to engage with the organization, which unfortunately is still, you can't, that's not an automatable step at the moment, to better understand the business. But going on to some of the, looking at the example you brought, different vendors for MFA, that they're moving towards that direction. I think a lot of, as from a BISO point of view, that is something that's would you leverage? This is the industry kind of position, and this is the industry direction, and we should be moving towards that. And I think a lot of organizations, they are quite mindful of what their peers are doing, and they want to do the right thing, and they want to, if their peers are moving in a certain direction, that they do want to be mindful and follow and be kind of going toward that direction. So there's a bit of self kind of enablement that way, if we can encourage it.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Yeah. All right. So let's turn from within the business up to the board, right? So in our report, we found that 90% of CISOs and BISOs believe that they're being asked to give more assurances on security controls, and 85% believe that they face greater board level scrutiny than ever before. So, what's your experience with board scrutiny, and how do you effectively communicate up to the board?
there's definitely greater visibility. I think there's, of what the right thing should be, and there's certainly definitely the board is most boards should be. I mean, in basically every industry, they should be well versed in sort of certain kind of requirements and expectations from them. So for CISO, chief security officers, who sort of sit sort of XCOM -1, who reports into the board, I think they certainly feel there's greater scrutiny in terms of their reporting, their activities, if they're spending, where the spend is going, alignment with industry, alignment with regulatory aspect. And I think sort of more recently, I think there were cases where those individuals were legally liable. So there's sort of for certain activities, and so there's, because of that, I think there's sort of more expectation of support, in terms of providing insurance that protects, which all the XCOM members have. And because that greater visibility, there's sort of an ask for support towards providing that kind of protection from a legal aspect of it. I think it's a good thing that there's greater visibility from the board, and it provides a good sort of enabler handler. But it is on the other side, you are under sort of greater scrutiny from the organization, regulators, shareholders. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword there.
I'd agree. So boards are usually used to a lot of certainty around the business, and security is, or the world that we live in is very uncertain, and that actually will freak you out, and you want to know and be as much certain as possible. So that is where the scrutiny comes from. But as well as now, I think so there's a lot more board who also speaks security language, just because of the awareness, the amount of topics which are going on in the industry, people attending talks, and a lot of shifts in terms of technology itself. Unlike, so for example, zero trust, a lot of board members would know about that, because that is more like, it's not a security technology, it's just the way of doing identity and access management. So that's again a huge investment for companies, or moving to cloud from on-prem. So that is like changing drastically how your business used to work and how to move fast, but also in a secure way. So there is a lot of scrutiny from the board, and it's a double-edged sword, because on the one side it's good, but then there's always security was always seen, is still seen as an overhead cost, because it's to try to figure out the return on investment. Like, are we investing in, or moving in the right direction? And due to the advancing threats and the landscape itself, it's difficult to connect. And that's where then CISOs and the security team are constantly working to bridge it together, so that it makes sense. We're going on the correct path, investing in the right security technologies, but also where the business is moving. And so it can be a lot, for sure, and it is, but I think that it's needed, because the liability, it works differently among different regions. US and the SEC and the laws, we have seen a lot of CISOs being liable and responsible, but also board is liable and responsible, because ultimately the business owners are the risk owners, and so it's like a whole liability group. And so everybody has to make sure that they understand the risks, they understand the impact, they understand the value of their investment. And so this is a discussion which we definitely need to have, and it's good that we're moving in this direction. I would just say it would be better if you get also the support that you require. So not always like do more with less, but understanding the business as well as helping with the visibility. I think even that basic of a support where we get the visibility rather than CISOs or security team trying to build the asset inventory, it would be like, okay, having different business leaders build that and be accountable for that, that would be a great help.
I think.
Yeah. Do either of you have any approaches you might recommend for CISOs walking into a board meeting? Anything that you found to be effective when reporting up?
I think just depends on your industry, depends on your organization. But one thing sometimes it's not great, but I think sometimes you need to sort of educate the board on the scale of the issue, and I think in different ways. I don't want to go into the specifics, but presenting that to the board would sort of help them to sort of understand the situation, in terms of threats and, from a legal and compliance point of view. And also from, just, publicity, like, you don't want to be the person on the news. But it is sort of almost like telling them as it is and sort of say, look, this is the scale of issue we're dealing with. And I think that helps with the sort of investment, the business case for investment, which is, I think, what we all need to do. We need to sort of be on top of it. It's not a one-time investment. We've got to keep sort of being there to make sure the posture is, as good as we can, and we're doing the right thing by our stakeholders.
I really like what Wendy said. It's not a one-time investment. And that is where I think so a lot of times people forget. It's not invest, set it up on board, and then leave it. It's not. It's an ongoing process. It's a life cycle. You have to keep on going. One of the approach which I could say is a lot of times, and I've learned it from my own experience, you tend to go in because ideally if you work in security, you're tend to think about the worst case scenarios. And so the way you communicate is always more about impact. And what I try to tell myself as well, like, okay, but also bring in the value, because when you talk to people about in a way where you showcase value, it's easier then for them to digest as well as see the investment going in the right path rather than just impact, because impact is very important. But then you have to go with the likelihood, and that is where it comes in, because it's very difficult in risk terms. It's just very difficult for people to then understand, because they're like, yeah, but this might not happen, but it might. And so I think we have to balance it out. But it definitely depends on your organization, on your board, on what has happened before. And so ideally, if there is an industry where you are opposed, so there is a community talk, like there's pre-incident CISOs, while the incident is going in CISOs, and the post-incident CISOs, and that all three are totally different ballgame on how you would present, but also totally different scenarios, because then board would have been through certain incidents where they realized, and so it's different, and everybody should focus on what works for them. But having these conversations and figuring out different approaches would definitely help.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you. So let's move to kind of reporting with your teams. So 2/3 of security leaders in our most recent report said they don't have all the cyber analytical tools they need to effectively deliver the assurances that are, part of this growing demand. And so I would say, what's your approach to reporting? How much time do you and your team spend reporting? Do you find that it's a large portion of the work that's being done, or, again, is it part of that balanced view?
We spend a lot of time on reporting because it's not straightforward. And that is where I think, I hope, I think so it's already moving in that direction. So using AI to actually move and help security teams on the reporting perspective would be great. We need some investment there because it's not straightforward. There's a lot of manual work still to be done to to change not manipulate in the sense data itself, but how to present it and how to connect all the dots. And it's not very straightforward because risks are more on the definition and perspective level, and the systems do not talk that language, and you always have to figure out the risk levels, and it's not something which you could just automate because different business units can bring different risks. And so yeah, it's a lot of work. Definitely improving on the automation. Once you have hit the right definition, it makes it easier, but still a lot of time and effort goes in. And kudos to all the security teams who go through it, because it's an overhead. So on the security engineering side or cyber defense side, like, you're already doing a lot of stuffs which require a lot of attention and a lot of time. But on top of that, you manage to do this as well as be compliant, all the evidences for the regulators, for audits. So yeah, a lot goes in. And more and more security leaders are looking into figuring out how automation can help you.
I think just follow up. I absolutely agree. I think it's still a significant overhead, and contrary to what some people say, nobody liked reporting. It is a chore. We are trying. There are different ways that I think we will get there. Of sort of getting that full picture. Making sure that you have the sort of your asset registers up to date, and what you're reporting on is kind of has a certain risk level, rather than just like bam, here's everything, right? So yeah, there is still quite a lot of manual work. I think most teams would say that they probably spend more time than they would like on the reporting side. I think there will be, in the next couple of years, there will be sort of significant progress from these sort of automation and leveraging AI, which is actually what we should be using it for. Is just like crunch through that data and and give you something that's sort of digestible for your XCOM to make that educated decision of activities. But it is, at the moment, it is sort of getting all the data together, making sure you're reporting at the right level. You're including risks, rather than just say you've got vulnerability here. Well, if it's a vulnerability that is on a closed system that's not connected to anything, is that something you should even be worried about? I think that part of it at the moment is still quite manual, and it is sort of getting that data in. Hopefully that will be automated at some point in the future.
Yeah, of course. So it sounds like there's obviously the collecting and then the normalization, right? As you say, not all risks are created equal. So what actually should we be paying attention to, and then elevating, right, up the chain? You both mentioned AI, which is very interesting. I think there's so much potential there. Currently, are your organizations or within the CISO communities that you're a part of, is there interest in sort of being early adopters of an AI solution, or is there still more concern about, hallucinations and kind of, I know with Gen AI, there's still a lot of questions. Yeah.
So not necessarily for like highlighting particular, but just the sort of community itself. I think in general, the productivity gains, regardless of hallucination, and that is getting better. The productivity gains of you leveraging AI in not just security, but every aspect actually of operations for your business. You can't, if you don't leverage it, you're going to be immediately so much behind, right? And in the retail, it's in the retail sector. The sort of margins are so fine that little bit of advantage, could go a long way. So I think, there's a option of not engaging. I'm a bit of a technologist, so I might be a bit more gung-ho about it. But it's just the productivity gains, the insight that you gain from leveraging those tools. I don't feel like we can not leverage them as an industry.
Before AI, it was machine learning. And the thing is, security is heavily based on behavioral analysis from incident perspective or cyber defense, but it's the intelligence of behavior. Like, how would a system behave? How would system files behave? How would an access or privilege access would behave, and where people could, or attackers could actually elevate that. So it's always been a behavioral analysis of things, process, systems, people, technology. It's all in. And yeah, right now AI is still, we have to train it, and then it would be a game changer in terms of the productivity gains. Yes, and there are risks as well. So CISOs, BISOs community also discusses about that, because there's data, a lot of unstructured data. DLP kind of failed in a lot of companies. So now we have a lot of unstructured data, and not necessarily we know, or people know, and they might just put something very confidential into an open source tool. And so that is always the risk there. And we do talk about it, but just like the gains that you would get, it's just, it's hard to not look into it,
Of course.
because it just would help you clear up a lot of stuffs that you have to manually process. Like having AI just look through the data, run through it, and using better prompts to optimize it to the level which you need is amazing. Not just getting into that scenario where, yeah, it's mediocre result, but it's fine, and now I'm tired. We shouldn't do that. We always should enhance the capabilities. But I think even from the security perspective itself, it's a huge it would be a huge benefit to get into it early, seeing from the security perspective, because attackers are already using it, and we need to improve our defense, our offensive side of things as well, and make it a little bit easier, because you could scale it easily with AI. Like, you could have 2 FTEs doing, for example, offensive security, and they're amazing. But imagine if they have a technology that they could leverage and replicate into scaling it into half of the business, so they could cover something in parallel. So it's more like, having a buddy which also like works with you. Yeah. So yeah, it's always pros and cons, but it's hard to not look at the pros. It's just that we have to figure out how to manage those risks.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I completely agree, and it makes sense. It's nice to see that kind of forward-looking approach. I mean, if you think about the resource shortage, right? Even just the cybersecurity talent shortage that's been, prevalent for many years now. Thinking about things like co-pilots and other programs that would allow, AI to really expand your workforce and your capabilities, especially after wrapping up a segment about just the hours of manual reporting, right? And the percentage of that. So it totally makes sense. Okay, so let's end the webinar just spending a few minutes on mental health, right? So in the report, a couple things that really came out were almost 50% of those who took part believe themselves to be more cautious than a year ago around how they approach their job as a security leader. 41% claim to be more anxious, and 15% even considered leaving the industry altogether. So that's not great. And so, how do we take better care of those working in this industry when the to-do lists have never been so long? Assurance is coming in. There is more compliance, more frameworks, more reporting. How do we help mitigate that and not lose sight of kind of the humans that are there doing this work every day and have those stressors placed upon them?
I can just tell my own experience, but I've also seen my own teams, like other teams which I've been part of. It's about learning how to manage stress, because most people who go into security, information security, they're problem solvers, right? We open up a can of worms. Oh, we need to solve it. Oh, we need to solve it. And you end up seeing a lot of stuff that you really want to solve. But we have to understand that we are all humans, and figuring out the pace at which you solve And this really helps, I'd say, from the perspective of, okay, what to prioritize. So prioritization is very important, on like personally making sure that you learn how to manage stress, in terms of also have a life outside of work is just really important. Having strong boundaries, it's really important, because if you work for 20 hours, for example, you might not be effective anymore, because you just too, like, you need different opinions. Like going for a walk or having a great workout actually helps you refresh and recover and come up with a better perspective than you previously had, because you're just overwhelmed and taking on a lot of information. You need time to process, and this usually happens when you're away from your laptop and your mailbox. You need that detachment to see things clearly. So I am I'm a huge fan of CrossFit, and it helps me a lot, like getting in a good morning workout, and having that, it helps your sleeping, your eating, your hydration. It makes sure it's like, it gives you this community as well, where you talk to people, and you also learn a lot of different things outside of your work, and that kind of like builds you up a lot more. And when you have a good sleep, a good rest, a good nutrition, and a good hydration, I think you just become a lot more optimistic about things. And so you bring in that energy into your work as well. And so that is really, really important, to take care of yourself, because it's very easy to burn out, because there is just so much of things to do. It's never ending, and you have to make sure that you understand your own limitations, not necessarily limitations, but like what works for you. You understand the prioritizations, because everything can be a high priority, and we still have to churn that list and figure out what is the high priority. And for that, you need to take care of yourself. If you take care of yourself, you can take better care of your team, and then collectively you can take better care of security itself. So yeah.
Great.
So I completely agree. I think it's sort of, there's lots of talk about cyber resilience, but it's sort of like human cyber resilience there. It's sort of getting yourself, I think going, do any, so that, you're basically refreshing and just be prepared for the next thing that comes. I mean, I think we're, well, from personally, I sort of got into the security industry because it is fast moving, but then, sometimes you have to sort of say, hang on, this is getting too fast. You have to step back to make sure that, you're looking after yourself. You want to make, check your colleagues that they're not, burning out, making sure that you're sort of there for them, especially if you've got a team of people. Just check in with them, and I do this, and my colleagues do this. It really helps to, sometimes you kind of almost want to vent. Okay, you sort of just want to sort of have this outlet, and then you're fine. And I think it's just like building that, with a combination of exercise, nutrition, making sure you're sleeping, making sure you're looking after yourself, and just keeping an eye on your team. That's going to help you sort of, have a successful career in security in the long run.
I love what you mentioned, because I was talking to one of my colleagues. I mean, she's in another organization, but within information security, it's like venting sessions or venting coffee chats are so important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it might sound like, and as a leader, you might be like, yeah, I should not complain. I should bring out the solutions, like not the problems. But still, venting can help you a lot, because once it's out, then you can figure out on like how to solve this, and you get another perspective as well. So it really helps having those coffee chats scheduled, like where you're talking person to person, not work, not priority. You're just talking to people on how they are and what's troubling them. Yeah,
exactly. And it's sort of like, I think, ultimately behind everything, we're still humans. We're not AI yet. So I think,
yes,
I think, yeah. So I think it's, at some point we might plug into the net. But I think just sort of being there, and I've seen this work, you know, just be there to sort of listen and be there to sort of allow people time. And I've seen this like work. It sort of just after the conversation, it's the same person, but it's like, you know, they kind of, you know, it's just much more positive outlook. And I think that is something that we can control. You know, whatever happens in the sort of security world, or, you know, it kind of happens, but there's, you know, how we respond to that is sort of the thing that we can control, and sort of making sure that you're fighting by yourself and for your team, I think is the way forward.
Yeah, I love that. Right. So we've covered a lot of topics today, and, you know, talking about cybersecurity and the technological advancements in AI, but, you know, it all comes back to the human connection, right? We're all here working together, and that's how we help and support each other. So Sneha, Wendy, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. And I hope you both have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.